Great. So we'll kick it off shortly in a moment with the panelists. But there will be time closer to the end if you have any questions. And I would strongly encourage you to ask any questions you might have as we progress through the panel. You can even, as they're coming up, feel free to put them in the chat. But there will be time to ask directly, to unmute, turn your camera on if you so choose, and ask directly as well. So with that, let's get us started with the first question, which is have each of you tell us a little bit about yourself and share a little bit about your current role, including like what a typical day looks like, what are some of your responsibilities, things like that. So whoever wants to kick it off for us is fine with me.
I mean, I'm already unmuted, so I can bite the bullet and go first.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Grace Kwiatkowski. I am a budget analyst at the New York State Senate Finance Committee. I'm MIA class of 2024, and I was also a dual enrollment student. So I did my BA and my MIA all in one shot. A typical day for me is engaging with members about their bills, doing research about how much they're going to cost, and participating in budget negotiations. So we prepare the state Senate one house, and then we participate in the budget negotiations on behalf of the Senate.
Awesome. Rob, you want to take it away, one of you?
Sure. My name's Rob Potts. I graduated in 2021. And in the past 5 years, I spent a couple of years in the UN system at UNCDF, and I'm now an impact specialist at DFC, which is the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, basically we're the U.S. government's development bank. So we invest in the private sector in emerging markets, mostly less developed countries. As an impact specialist, I'm focused on the economic, environmental, and social impact outcomes of our projects. So we're doing kind of socioeconomic context research in these markets, looking at projects and impact scoring, evaluating their potential risks as well, and preparing guidance documents for our senior leaders, as well as congressional oversight on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Senate Foreign Relations Committee on projects invested in various international markets.
Amazing. Colleen?
Cool. Hi, my name is Calin Popa. I was MIA class of 2025 last year at UAlbany. I moved to DC during that about a year and a half ago. I currently work in procurement, logistics, and supply chains at HII, Mission Technologies. We're a major defense contractor. So I work across a handful of defense contracts to acquire their things they want, spend the Pentagon budget essentially, and manage the deliveries, the vendors, the negotiations, supply chains, making sure the military gets what they need on time, essentially. That's my day. So thank you.
Awesome. So going into your next question, I think this will be insightful for the students. Can you tell us a little bit about what your path, now that we understand your role, tell us a little bit about what your path looked like from graduation to your current role? What was that journey like, and what kind of opportunities were along the way?
I'm still unmuted, so I can continue on this one. From graduation to my current role, so I moved to DC for a job with the federal government at the GAO, where I worked on their Coast Guard team working on shipbuilding issues. And shipbuilding is very hot in DC right now. From there, that was temporary. From there, I interned on the Hill at the Senate for a little while. And then I kind of leveraged my shipbuilding experience to get into HII, which is the nation's largest shipbuilder. We build the aircraft carriers, the Navy submarines, the battleships. So I kind of found a niche, networked, and pursued it during the program and after graduation.
I would definitely echo that. When I left my program, it wasn't the best job market, but it was, I think, probably a little better than this one. I actually worked with Rockefeller for about 6 or 8 months after I graduated. I had done my capstone program working with the UN Capital Development Fund, helping review their investments. And so I actually got a job with Rockefeller working on that same capstone program until a position opened up at UNCDF. I applied, went through the inevitable UN hiring process where you spend months in limbo with nothing happening. Gotten for 1 year on a contract where they promptly had no funding, and I didn't get renewed. So I found myself a year and a half out of school, already without a job. Looking again. That's how I landed at DFC. They were hiring at the time. There was a big expansion in that kind of 2023, 2024 timeframe. So it really gave me the chance to take that next step while remaining in the international development space, but to an organization with greater funding stability and greater growth trajectory.
I started as a legal assistant and paralegal at a big law firm immediately after graduation, and I quickly found out that that wasn't for me, and I needed something that was a little bit more writing based and policy based, and a position opened up with the State Senate Finance Committee, and I jumped at the opportunity.
Amazing. So I'm going to jump to one of the questions here. What skills do you actually use day to day? I guess that might surprise students or might not surprise students. Just what are the top skills you're dealing with day to day? Some that might surprise students.
I can jump in first because I haven't been the first one yet. I regret to inform anybody who is like me and is a writing person, not a numbers person, that the number one answer to this, no matter what your job will be, is Microsoft Excel. You will use Excel for literally everything, even things you don't think should be in Excel. And really understanding how to use it to get what you want out of it is, I would say, an essential skill for pretty much any career today. Yes, we're moving toward automation. Yes, there's more AI tools coming out every day. So much of the world of international business and government is just built on the backbone of these tools that were mostly built in Microsoft Excel.
That's true. Echo that for sure.
I would echo that, but also writing for decision makers is a skill that I use every day. And communicating with decision makers and practicing that skill was really helpful and translated well from Rockefeller to my job now.
I would definitely echo that. I remember one of my classes, the assignments were writing a series of memos to different hypothetical audiences. And that is something I use all the time. When you're trying to brief a congressperson's chief of staff on a project they've never heard of but have a sudden huge objection to, and you've got 45 seconds to tell them everything they need to know, you can't waste that time. You need to know exactly what they need to hear in those 45 seconds. And if you can't hone in on that, they're not going to invite you back next time. So that's something you should definitely prioritize in terms of like dropping your skills while you still have time.
Yeah, I have a similar example. I currently cover education for the Senate Finance Committee, and I don't know if anybody else is aware of like how the foundation aid formula works, but you have to be able to communicate how this complex formula works and impacts all of the districts in a member's district. So it's a skill that literally I use more often than anything else, even Excel sometimes.
Absolutely. So kind of on the heels of that, can you walk us through a recent project you worked on and its impact? I don't want to assign anyone first, so whoever feels like jumping in.
I can start off. Recent, what was the question? Recent project and its impact.
Yep. Yep.
This week I've been working on, we're trying to get some like towers and security systems to the Air Force in Germany, and timelines. Everybody wants everything now, especially with all the military activity going on right now. So my project was working with the company to get these loaded onto Air Force planes. the licensing required for that, the engineering schematics that the Air Force needs in their hands. I had to get that to them. And planning out the logistics for it. How do we get these 10,000-pound trailers across the ocean tomorrow, right? So it's a lot of multitasking, a lot of not letting things fall through the cracks, and dealing with all sorts of different entities and types of people to, get the objective across the finish line.
So one major project that I've been working on recently that's been publicly announced, so I can actually talk about it now, is the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. If you haven't followed that piece of news at all, last year the U.S. government and Ukrainian government inked a deal on a jointly funded, basically investment fund that would support the rebuilding of Ukraine's infrastructure, energy sector, and emerging technologies. DFC was the U.S. government agency tasked with setting that up and managing it from the U.S. government side. So we had a very small team that had to figure out, okay, how does a government agency run an investment fund? We've never done that before. We had to build it from the ground up, figure out how you incorporate a fund in Delaware, things you never thought you'd need in a government career. And my role on that team especially was focused on how we were going to measure the outcomes of the fund. So setting up not a scoring model, because we're not putting it through our regular government scorecard system, but a model that is responsive to the needs and the realities of data collection challenges in that market. So we were really building this from the ground up, getting to write the P&Ps, getting high-level face time with senior members of the Ukrainian government who had a clearly vested interest in this. And as of last month, the fund has made its first investment in a really interesting UAV drone navigation technology firm called Sign Engineering that is Ukraine-based. And they basically provide autonomous operations software for defensive drones that are being deployed not just in Ukraine, but other markets globally. Really interesting project outside the realm of what I signed up for when I came here, but something that has potential to have really huge impact down the road.
And a little bit different. Part of my job is to analyze the executive budget when it comes out in January. So my job is basically to read through all of the bill copy, condense it, send it in a draft to my higher ups, and then that's what the senior leaders of the majority read. One of those documents is the Senate One House resolution. So I typed up part of that, my section of it, and that is what ended up in the bill copy. So that's the most I could probably say about it, just because we're still in the process of budget negotiations. But it's really cool to be able to touch policy in that way.
Yeah, that's fair. We just appreciate anything you guys can share on those topics. But so on a more holistic kind of general level, you touched on it a little bit with the projects, but what are some primary benefits and challenges of your current role, and how have you navigated them as you've progressed in your career?
So I think one huge benefit of where I am now is I am a civil servant, federal government, and DFC survived while some other agencies in our sector did not. I came here for stability, and I got stability. The sheer volume of resources that we have to deploy, I believe the way the stats break out is if you compare us to other international investors who are making moves in these markets, including private sector, we are the third largest international investor in the world. And our agency was created less than 5 years ago. That impact cannot be had in a lot of other places. But I have very much been challenged, especially over the past year and a half or so, by the political nature of the type of work we do. when you're in a government agency, even when it is set up to be not necessarily apolitical, but focused on other outcomes, and removed from kind of the back and forth of the daily political process, politics weighs on what you do in a way I didn't expect, in a way that I had not seen when I was working in the UN system, in state government, in my life before my master's degree. So it's been challenging navigating some of those policy considerations, and especially under this administration, figuring out how we can push for projects that are having the maximum impact in actually delivering local benefits to the populations we're trying to help in these markets, while still addressing strategic concerns for the United States.
Colleen or Grace, you want to add on to that, or?
I can add to that especially in DC, the politics will impact a lot of roles in the city, of course. When I came here, I worked for a non-political agency as well, the GAO. But even there, there's still political considerations, and even more so to the hiring. Like the federal budget dictates a lot, from defense contracting to the hiring of the federal government itself. So if you are interested in a job in government or the general DC area, best pay attention to the way where the winds are blowing and what the budget is looking like, especially for your chosen field or career.
I think with the legislature, my position isn't as impacted as my my fellow panelists on like overall budgetary concerns, because I'm a direct staffer. I do know that at the agencies, it all depends on budget concerns and that kind of thing. We are, as much as my role is political and that I work for the majority and I staff debate on the floor, it's also apolitical in that we advise, we don't decide. And I think that's both a benefit and a challenge, because you can work on a bill for 4 sessions and what you want to happen just isn't going to happen, because it's, at the end of the day, it's not your baby, is what we like to call it. So it's both a fun challenge and it's sad to see those things go.
I'd also just add like a practical day-to-day challenge that I think is probably shared by all of us, and really any kind of role for a large organization. As a student, you're often able to use the most advanced and cutting edge stuff. You have subscriptions to anything you can imagine. The latest AI model comes out and you're playing around with it because it's there and you can log in. When you join a large organization, there are layers and layers of built up systems and tech debt. And you might have great ideas for ways to improve efficiency or modernize something or improve a process, but you are bound by the systems that you operate in. And a lot of change that to you might seem really common sense, and everyone around you might agree is common sense, can't just be implemented. It has to go through a process. It's slow. You're not going to get everything you want there. It's something that's a reality of everyday life in any large organization.
I would definitely echo that, working in state government for sure.
And this might be a little bit of a redundant question, so if it is, we can move right on, but because you guys started to touch on this, but how does your work environment, whether it's, state, private, et cetera, shape your experience? Or government, private, yeah.
I have been surprised by how similar, but also how different the US government and the UN system have been. On the one hand, they're both very large bureaucratic organizations that do a lot of different things, that do a lot of them fairly well, but also have a lot of problems. But on the other hand, like I was saying in the previous answer, here the politics is ever present. the way we think about engaging with the world and markets. There are countries where in the UN, in my previous job, we would have happily worked on a project that we probably wouldn't work on now, because as a U.S. government agency, we also have to factor in U.S. strategic and foreign policy elements and restrictions on how we can operate. I feel like being based in DC, even though I'm still in international development, I tend to spend more time in the US government bubble, whereas when I was in New York, I spent a lot more time in the international organization bubble and like engaging with a broader degree of stakeholders than I do now.
I would say that I engage with stakeholders on a deeper level than I would have anticipated doing on in an international relations job. We have organizations come and lobby for certain bills on the daily, and there's protests outside. It's a pretty lively environment during session, but I will say the second half of the year is a much calmer environment living in Albany rather than during session. So you do kind of get the dichotomy of people are super, super passionate about what's going on, and then crickets the second half of the year.
I guess I don't have too much to add. I've been in the US government bubble kind of the whole time I have seen the different sides of it though, from the agency side to the legislative to the US Senate on the Hill, which is like Albany, like in session is chaotic and then it's not chaotic at all when it's out of session. And then in the defense contracting world is a little unique because it still is, the government is our main customer and we do what the military wants essentially. But also there is a lot of cutting edge things going on and a lot of cool developments happening. So it's very interesting. It's a cool environment.
One funny contrast I remember in that regard is like this week in DC is the spring meetings for the World Bank and the IMF, which is kind of a big conference, research papers, schmoozing, and whatnot. And everyone in my current team was fighting over who would get to go to the spring meetings events and do all this stuff. When I was at the UN, everyone would fight over how can I get as far away from New York as possible during the UN General Assembly. That is the last place I want to be. It's like a very funny contrast.
Yeah. It's like whiplash. Yeah. I want to take a pause here. I certainly have more questions, but I want to pause to see if students have any questions so far for the panelists as a whole or specific panelists. Certainly don't be shy. This is a great opportunity to ask any questions.
I have a question if no one else wants to go.
Absolutely.
Um,
Go ahead.
yeah, sorry about my camera. I don't know why it's doing that. This one's for Rob. I know you mentioned like everything about there being like politics involved in your job, and I know I've been interested in the international development space since the beginning of my undergrad. And there's been a lot of changes in the whole industry. For me, that's looking for a job in international development right now. It's quite hard, as you mentioned. So I guess I was wondering like how these changes, like the dissolution of USAID, kind of affected your job and if it did at all, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I could say really candidly, if we go back in time about a year and 2, 3 months, we thought we were going to be in exactly the same boat and we were all going to get riffed. And then we didn't. We're still here. MCC was also on the chopping block, but has survived and is evening some new compacts. The DC job market for international development is still very rough. I mean, you saw 10, 15,000 people between USAID and the various implementing partners, contractors, etc., all get laid off who are mostly still in this market. So if you're trying to find something new in DC in development right now, you're going to have a tough time just because everyone who is maybe in those like junior mid-level roles before is looking even at the entry-level roles that do exist because they just need something. I would say another challenge for me personally has been we lost a ton of, USAID had a whole component of foreign service officers on the ground with US embassies and consulates around the world. And they were really our eyes and ears on the ground in a ton of these countries. DFC, we have, I think, about 8 or 10 people out of an agency of about 550 who are permanently overseas. So we have lost so much insight into what is happening on the ground in these countries, which unfortunately the State Department has not really been able to fill, because the way they engage in local markets is just very different from the way USAID FSOs engage. We don't know what that looks like long term. But I guess what I would say, if you're looking for work in the development space right now, as I think many of you probably will be, one thing I wish I had done differently from the beginning is I wish I had gone international off the bat. It's not true at DFC. It was not true at USAID, but for a lot of hiring agencies in the development space, the reality is there is something of a glass ceiling if you do not have field experience. And it is a lot easier to get that experience early in your career before you're really settled in one place. This is a great time to look for that, 1 or 2 year contract as a, project associate or, an M&E specialist out in the field. I would really consider looking at that. I know that the Asian markets have been relatively less impacted as compared to Africa. In the US, there's a lot of interest in Latin America that hasn't really translated to jobs yet, but it might. The other thing I'd suggest is looking at the world of the multilateral development banks. So like ADB, EBRD, AFDB, IDB Invest. They are generally more insulated from budget pressures, and their hiring has mostly stayed at pace. I'd also just add, other DFIs. I work at DFC, we're a U.S. government agency. Most other countries' DFIs are not government agencies, they're government-owned corporations. So, for example, the Dutch DFI FMO or the Canadian DFI FinDev Canada, they do hire non-Canadians, non-Dutch citizens, etc. So that can be another potential angle for finding work in the development space, looking at those international partner organizations that work in similar spaces.
That's really interesting. I could ask a million more questions, but I'm going to leave it to other students. But yeah, it makes me want to get my Peace Corps prep from UAlbany certificate.
Awesome. We can get back to you with some more questions too, Emmy. So we'll circle back, but we do have one in here from Mateo. It's for Grace. He was saying he was in your class you TA'd for a few semesters ago with Professor Friedman. His question is, given your degree in international affairs, would you say your experience working for New York State government satisfies your passion for IR studies? And can you speak to how your background in IR blends into the work you take on? It's an excellent question.
I thought I recognized your name. It's great to see you. It's great to see your screen. I would say that my work doesn't necessarily satisfy my passion for international relations. I still engage with the content. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I still read international news, but I definitely can speak to how it blends into the work I take on, because I was a diplomacy concentration and I use those skills every day. Sometimes I have to go into meetings and it is expected of me to, if somebody says something out of left field, I have to keep a straight face. I have to just nod, take my notes, and then close the door and be like, what was that? So I would say there are a lot of intersections that you wouldn't expect, but I would say that this is more of a step. I viewed this job as more of a stepping stone to get me somewhere that may be closer to international relations for sure.
We do have another question here in the chat from Constance. I don't know if you want to ask this one because I want to make sure I understand what you mean, but do you have any advice for MPA concentration in Homeland Security? I think, do you mean for students pursuing more Homeland Security, perhaps? Yes. Okay.
My concentration was in global and Homeland Security. And really the internship experience, matters quite significantly, or any experience you can get that's at least tangentially related to the field of national security studies or broadly defense or technology, whatever it may be. So I would say there's a lot of contractors, be it general federal government contractors or military defense contractors, that do have plenty of internship opportunities. So I would scan all of their websites, even some of the smaller ones that might not have the same name recognition. They still work or are subcontracted out on, important national security work, homeland security work. So, get one of those internships on your resume if you can.
I'd also add to that that defense and intelligence agencies, by and large, did not see the same headcount reductions that most of the government did. And they were some of the first to pick up hiring again. So if you're interested in federal civil service side, straight out of your master's is actually a great time to enter government, because on the civil service career scale, you can enter at a high enough level with a completed master's that you'll find ladder positions that will enable you to quickly move and spend a few years up into higher grades of civil service. So you might not be making that much out the door in year one, but if you can find a position that maybe ladders you up a couple of grades, you could very quickly move into a comfortable DC-based role within 2-3 years of graduation if you go that route.
I would
Yeah,
say
I can add a little to that too, actually. OPM recently, the Office of Personnel Management, put out a notice that only 7% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30. And that is a dismally small number, and they want to change that. So they are opening up a lot of opportunities along defense intelligence agencies, but broadly the whole federal government, for job openings specifically for young people. So I would keep an eye out on the OPM requisitions for that. There was just a big government-wide one on project management. So keep an eye on what OPM is saying, and if they say anything about under 30, take the opportunity.
I would also say from the state government perspective that Dishes does a lot of counterterrorism work, which does overlap with a lot of things that we talk about in the global homeland security classes. So that's also something you could take a look at.
Yeah, not to mention that can be a great stepping stone into the federal space if you're looking to gain experience and be competitive. Yeah, amazing. More questions from the students?
Oh, again, if no one else has one.
Go for it.
Again, for Rob, I was wondering in impact assessment if there were any particular frameworks or skills or software that you would recommend learning. I'm in my final year of undergrad, so now would kind of be the time to like get those skills. So yeah.
Yeah. So as far as impact measurement goes in the international development space, there are kind of two, most organizations will have their own scorecard or framework or system that's kind of unique to their needs. But broadly speaking, they're all based on one of two broad frameworks. One is called HIPSO. The other is called IRIS Plus. That's maintained by GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network. If you're interested specifically in impact assessment, impact measurement, at least having a broad-based understanding of one of those two systems is going to be really helpful. In general, IRIS Plus and GIN system is favored by the private sector. HIPSO is generally favored by like MDBs, DFIs. That's something to maybe explore. I would say a skill I would suggest building up now is in the realm of data analytics, data visualization tools. So if you're not familiar with like Power BI or Tableau or any of those tools for visualizing data, that's something that I wish I had spent more time cultivating when I was still in my program. For better or worse, data analytics, data visualization are a huge part of how organizations talk about impact, and being able to effectively demonstrate through those tools the quantified impact outcomes you're delivering is really essential.
Yeah, I'm good with R, but not Tableau, and I've seen it a lot on job applications, but thank you.
Excellent. Any more student questions? We do have a few more for the panelists, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end, but if there's any right now, I'm happy to take them. All right. Well, I want to go into what you guys have started to touch on, the application and advice and tips for students as they kind of prepare for the market. So we'll start with this question first, but what helped you stand out when you were applying for your first role?
Internal references. Yeah, it helps know people. Reach out to people on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Events, conferences, if you get to that point, of course. But LinkedIn is a good place to start.
Yeah.
If you're interested in the UN system, which I'd say is where I started my IR career, I worked at UAlbany first as part of my capstone, and then as a employee at Rockefeller on a partnership program with UNCDF. So I was making those connections. I was actually doing kind of outsider looking in work on their projects. So when a position opened up at the entry level, I was already hitting every element of the requirements because I'd done that work. If you want to enter the UN system, you have connections to the UN system. A great way to do that is identifying partner organizations of the organization you'd like to work for in your local market or the local market you're working in, and working with them. So for example, if you wanted to work on like human rights with UNHCR, a great place to start there would be working with, for example, your local Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders affiliate, where they do a lot of work together. And that will help you build connections and a network, and also a portfolio of achievements, which will help you get in that first door. Because even at the entry level, when you're applying for a really competitive job with a top tier employer, you're competing against people who already have those achievements somewhere else, who frankly shouldn't be applying for entry level roles, but they are. And you just kind of have to go in knowing that that's who you're competing against and present yourself in a strong way to get past that.
I both of my jobs post grad were slightly different from each other, and I used slightly different strategies for both. So I'll touch on what I did for each. But my first job, I will echo the connections piece because when I did my internship for Rockefeller, my boss for my internship ended up knowing of the partner at the law firm that I was interviewing at. And they had dinner parties type of know each other. So um so I leveraged that connection in that instance. And for my position now, I think I emphasized my willingness to learn on the job, and being somebody that knew state government but like didn't really know state government after my internship. I think that was really important. It is also important to note that my role right now is a lot of young people and a lot of people that are post grad. And there's a lot of flexibility to learn on the job, and you're learning something new every day. So that was an important aspect. But my advice would be to know exactly how you want to market yourself, and you'll do better if you know exactly what you'd like to convey.
Also, quantify your achievements. Like to the extent that you can, hiring managers like numbers. It gives them a sense of what you have actually done and what it translated into. As far as comparing like US government and my other jobs, US government is very particular about it's a 2-page resume. It has to be very directly responsive to every criteria that is listed in that job posting, where you're explaining how you meet it because you did this. And that is very different from, for example, my like successful UN applications, where I had a much longer resume, where each bullet point was really almost a paragraph, where I was going into in a detailed way the types of work I was doing, the interventions on the ground, as compared to when I got my last private sector job, where it was a 1-pager with super high level bullet points. Just do some research into the type of organization you're applying for and what type of profile they would expect from a candidate. to make sure that you're not submitting, the wrong types of documents to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, we can absolutely help you as an office with that too. So don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll just echo everything you've said. Every job I've gotten has related to networking in some way, shape, or form. So I know it's the word we always kind of yell at you guys to do, but it's really for a reason. It does kind of lead to these opportunities, which is, it's good to hear from the panelists tangibly how that was for them. So on the heels of that, because we're, with the students thinking about their current experiences, what skills, courses, internships, or other experiences from your time at Rockefeller have been most valuable for you in your career, would you say?
I think we kind of touched on it before, but both stats classes were incredibly helpful, especially the presentations at the end and learning how to convey your results and what you found and your methodology. I would also say, like I said before, like in all of your classes, you're writing memos to a certain audience. That's crucial. I think it sounds like in every government job.
Definitely those 3 classes. Another one that's been really useful for me was global environment. The research paper from that class, the approach I took to researching that project very closely mirrors the way I've had to engage with industry literature in preparing reports in my current role. So that's something that definitely was helpful for me. I would say my capstone is what I have to give the real credit to, though, because I didn't actually think I was going to go into development when I started my master's. I thought I wanted to do humanitarian work. And it was through that capstone and working on these local economic development projects in, LDCs that I figured out, like, this is the direction I want to pivot in. So if you're not sure about where you want to go, like, use that capstone opportunity to explore maybe a different path than the one you were expecting and see if that's a place you want to chase down.
I will agree with both of my co-panelists here. I don't think I have anything to add beyond that.
Well, excellent. I think this is all just good insight for them as they kind of consider what's next and how they can break into the market. I have 1 or 2 more questions, but I want to stop. Are there any further questions from students? Because I definitely want you guys to be able to ask your questions. That's important. All right, I'll go ahead with my 1 or 2 more questions, and then we can take any final student questions and wrap. So we started to touch on this earlier, but I thought this question was really poignant. Curious what, from your perspective, are there any emerging skills, global trends, or issue areas students should pay attention to as they enter the field? And what advice would you offer students exploring careers in international affairs or related fields? I know we started to touch on it, but it's a 2-parter, so I'm happy to repeat.
I could begin with just generally the AI revolution that's taking hold of everything right now. A lot of employers are pushing people to use it. There's a lot of AI tools that might be unique to the employer that you end up at, that you'll sharpen your skills at when you get there, of course, but having a general knowledge of how it works and how it can be applied to things that might not be obvious will help you in the workplace. And pay attention to the global trends. If you're working in international development or international affairs generally, it's a very fluid space, especially in the present political environment. It helps to pay attention and know where the winds are blowing for future planning and your own career purposes.
Yeah, I would echo that for sure. The AI push is real. I've been in and out of these meetings at the World Bank all week, and I would say a solid third to half are in some way touching on potential impacts of AI across the space. Whether you use it a lot in your personal life or not, the tech is here. It is going to have transformative impact on some of the ways you do your work. How much that will impact for you will vary based on your role. For example, in my organization, I'm on like a small team that's working on developing AI tools for our impact management systems, and we're very limited by the fact that our secure government approved like internal AI system is not running on the latest models of ChatGPT. So there are things that you could potentially do on the public facing model that I can't do in the workplace. But understanding how to use those tools, I think, is going to continue to be essential. Also, just with everything going on in the world, I would suggest consider becoming a bit of a regional expert in your free time. I work all around the world, all different sectors, all different projects. But whenever there's a question about the financial system in the West Bank, I'm the first person somebody in my team emails. Why? Because I developed this random piece of specialized knowledge for a project like 3 or 4 years ago now, and I've since become an internal expert on that niche thing. If you have an interest in Central Asia and the Trans-Caspian trade routes, learn about it. Like, learn to emphasize that, because there is a niche for having highly specialized technical expertise in a given area or region. If you're a Strait of Hormuz expert right now, you are the most in-demand person in Washington, D.C. And it's Strait of Hormuz today, but you don't know what it'll be tomorrow. So if you have that interest, chase it down.
I would also echo the AI piece, but from a slightly different lens. I worked on a couple pieces of legislation last year in my former portfolio that were landmark AI regulation bills, one of which that got signed into law. And it's crucial that you understand how these tools work in order to legislate them. So it's whether or not you're going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. I know at the legislature, we're not quite at the point of having our own like classified models that we'd be able to use. And it's pretty discouraged to use them at work because all we really have are the open source models. So I would also echo everything else that my co-panelists have said thus far.
Great. Looks like we do have a question from a student in the chat. Chomo asked, what's one skill you didn't realize you were learning during your capstone, but now use all the time?
I would say I've always been someone who is relatively comfortable with like off the cuff public speaking like this. But in my natural presentation style, as you've probably noticed, I have a tendency to meander and, maybe take a little longer than you should. My capstone involved making short presentations to an investment committee for an international organization. And I had 30 seconds. And learning how to express what they need in the time you have is such an essential skill that nobody ever consciously teaches you. You just get better at it the more you do it. That's probably the single biggest thing for my capstone that has helped me in my day-to-day today, where I have to engage with more, senior decision makers who don't want to be overburdened with information they don't need.
I would say for me, I did my capstone for Save the Children Norway, and we researched how they could use strategic litigation to further their cause. And strategic litigation is essentially using a lawsuit to further a humanitarian cause. So we had to present our project at 5 o'clock in the morning because it was a lunch and learn presentation for lawyers in Norway. So this, I know it seems a little random, but last year during session, I was on the floor staffing debate at 4 o'clock in the morning on the last couple of days of session. So you never know what time of day you'll get called to present something and be on it.
My capstone was a little unique. I helped Professor Kozlowski with like research and literature review for his AI and AI and like migration class that he's teaching. And I kind of learned a lot about AI, really, so that was interesting. But that's about all I could add for that one.
I don't think AI is going anywhere, so that's been
No.
it's been echoed,
Yeah.
please. So, are there any final questions before we wrap up the panel? Any final questions from students? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering again, now that everything has shifted away, at least in the US, from like international development, have you, and this goes to everyone, have you found that learning, I guess, US based skills or US industry knowledge has helped for like an international development career path or an international affairs career path? Or do you think that your time would have been better spent researching like international issues, as Rob was saying, like specialized knowledge on some other country or region? Yeah.
Great question.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Mhm.
I come from a more IR background. I came to US government through the UN system. But I look at people on my team, and there are people who worked for US banks. There are people who worked for the Forest Service or EPA or, you know, big US corporations in like their CSR offices. And those are all valid pathways into this international space. You can learn useful skills anywhere. And if you can find a good opportunity that helps you develop those relevant skills in a given sector or area, even if it's not internationally focused, that is a great use of your time and it's not closing you off from getting here. So definitely consider those US options. But I'd also say, like, I wouldn't say we've entirely pulled back from international development. It's certainly been the branding. But when you look at how much money is actually moving, um, it's not yet clear cut that the US is going to spend all that much less. It's just the way it's being spent that's evolving. So at DFC, for example, we are now much more heavily focused on large ticket size projects in like infrastructure and energy. Whereas before we were doing a lot more smaller projects, maybe in like small business support, climate adaptation, things like that in the previous administration. Um, you know, Not going to say it's an easy time to get into development, but I do think that the sector is still there. The dollars are still there. And it's just a question of what form they're ultimately going to take down the road.
It's interesting that you say that because the question was motivated by an internship that I have right now. And it's based on the US energy sector. So that's why I was wondering like whether like US energy sector information would translate well into like international development energy type of
Yeah,
work.
100%.
Okay, that's cool.
I also have like a semi-personal anecdote. One of my good friends' partner works in the energy space and they were planning to move to Germany and he would 100% has not had a trouble finding a job in Germany in energy. So it's not something I think it's something that's a transferable skill for you for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great question.
I can echo that US energy is very hot right now. Department of Energy is still hiring and they have a lot of cool toys and it's transferable to a lot of the government.
Mhm.
I'd also just add in developing markets. Yes, the US is in a controversial place right now with regard to our foreign policy, and we have potentially strained relationships with longtime allies, other wealthy countries. That same dynamic has not necessarily played out in the same way in the developing world. And US technical expertise is as prized as ever when you're trying to develop infrastructure, energy, et cetera, in emerging markets in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, parts of Latin America. When they're looking to bring in international experts, their number one choice to get someone on the ground is, a U.S. engineer with U.S. experience to help them build that up for capacity building. So that is something to, just think about when you're choosing your opportunities out of school.
Very good point. Any final questions, thoughts before we wrap up? Okay, we have one more question we'll take. I know we're kind of approaching 5:30, so we'll take one more question and then we'll we'll wrap up here. So Camia, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly, asked, are there any positions or areas you would all suggest to develop the skills you use in your day-to-day professional life?
I guess I can go first. I would say take advantage of your internship. I would learn everything you can while you're boots on the ground in the workplace. I know that finding an internship for your program can be very difficult. I spent both years of my master's program looking for an internship, and I did it in my last semester. Um, so I think any skills that you learn while you're actively working and actively touching the material that you think you may want to pursue after graduation, I think those are the most useful.
And those skills are also very relevant, regardless of the sector they're in. You know, part of the reason I had my capstone with the UNCDF and Rockefeller was because I didn't find a great flagship internship doing what I wanted to do. I'd probably be in a very different career today if I had. But I took the opportunity that was in front of me, and it ended up changing the trajectory of my entire career. If you can find a great internship where you'll develop skills, maybe in state government, maybe in the private sector, the U.S. Domestically focused roles, that is totally worth pursuing, because most of the skills you use every day in international relations, international development, are exactly the same as the skills you need in any other office job.
Right.
Like, yeah, I do cool international stuff, but if I went and got a job with, the state of Maine in their, state natural resources department tomorrow, the things I do, like in terms of the actual work skills being used, probably wouldn't change all that much, even though the sector, everything else looks so different.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. A lot of the skills are very transferable, especially in the broader government space, no matter whether you're in energy or state or whatever it may be. The skills are all very transferable, and just communication and getting your point across effectively, and the specialized knowledge will come with time in the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always good to hear and reinforce, because the IA space can be, it's niche, right? So there's not always opportunity, especially in Albany, depending on the time and the situation. So it's great to hear that perspective and reinforce it, that can all lead to, wherever you want it to go in international affairs or otherwise. Well, we're beyond 5:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and start to close out, but I want to say thank you so much to the panelists for taking the time, especially on this hot day, for being here and sharing your incredible insights. I think this is the kind of stuff that helps students start to figure out, what's next for them, and what are, not just in terms of opportunities, but next steps. So thank you so much for lending your time and your expertise, and thank you so much to the students for being here, especially on such a nice day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.